Good evening and welcome to the High Plains Music Camp Night of Jazz. You're in store for three really great jazz bands, beginning with Jazz Band Gold that you see on the stage. Before we begin, I would like to turn to page 3 in your program to help me thank the High Plains Music Camp sponsors. Our platinum sponsors for the High Plains Music Camp are the Band of Angels, run through Meyer Music. They provide free scholarships for many of our campers to attend the High Plains Music Camp. The Leo J. and Albina Dreiling Trust is a major donor for our camp, as are Rob and Tracy Kennemer of Kennemer Orthodontics. Our gold sponsors are Taco Shop here in Hayes. And then our silver sponsors, Gary and Elizabeth Smidler and the Copper Carts. And then our bronze sponsor, Bonnie Dilly, who sponsored our student honor recital that we held on Wednesday. We have one more concert this week to end the camp. Is our final camp concert tomorrow, starting at 9 a.m. with the camp chorus, followed by the middle school small ensembles, and then at 10:20 the high school small ensembles, and then after lunch the large ensembles, beginning with the middle school band at 1:30. So hopefully you can join us for those. Welcome campers, welcome public, welcome to everyone online. All of our concerts are being streamed this week. Not only that, but they're being cataloged on the FHSU Department of Music and Theater YouTube page. You could even view last year's camp programs that are still up there. And all of our concerts tomorrow will be also live streamed on YouTube. So if you can't be with us in person, check us out online. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you grew up in Hayes, went to Hayes High School, alumni of Fort Hays State University, currently the director of bands at Shawnee Mission East in Kansas City, and one of the top jazz educators in the state. Please welcome to the stage to conduct Jazz Band Gold, Alex Tepford.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Lopot, for the introduction. This is the Gold Band. My name is Mr. Tepfer, Alex Tepfer from Shawnee Mission East High School. You heard just now from Sam Washburn on the tenor saxophone. You also heard from Nash Olin, who's actually our jazz piano faculty this year. He's also a student at Shawnee Mission East as well, and you'll hear from him tonight in the ensemble. He's a fantastic player. Next, I'd like to, as Dr. Lopop said, I'm from Hayes, and I went to Fort Hays State, and one of my big mentors was, of course, Brad Dawson, among many, many other students who have come through the years. And I believe, he's retiring and is, riding off into the sunset of his career. And it's just such an honor to be able to have him on the stage. I got to play with him the other day on the faculty recital, and then tonight in the jazz ensemble as well. I wouldn't be where I am today without Brad, and I know many people could say the same thing. So the next one we're going to play is going to feature several people on this as well. I'll introduce them really quick. It'll be Grady Hawks on the trumpet, Jake Eckert on the trombone, Ben Bergman on the alto saxophone, Brad Dawson on the trumpet, Ethan Wallace on the drum set, and Eva Downing on the bass. And then Mr. Dawson will take us out. This is Red Garland's Blues by Five. Okay, a few thank yous. First of all, this is a mixed instrumentation this year. We've done middle school bands, high school bands, and we thought it would work a little bit better if we mixed some of the instrumentation so we can have more of a balanced ensemble. Imagine, a football team having 18 wide receivers and no linemen or something like that. So first of all, thanks to all the students who really rolled with the punches on that change. That really helped us overall, and I really appreciate those of you who are flexible. We had several high school students come down to play with what is the high school or the middle school ensemble, so I'm really thankful to them. Also, throughout a week of rehearsals, how many days of rehearsals do we have? Like really 5 full days of rehearsals, so to put together this amount of material takes a lot of help, and I had a lot of help with other teachers, either trumpet teachers here at camp or trombone teachers here at camp for various instruments, rhythm section. So I had a lot of help with coaches throughout the week, and so I really appreciate that. The last thing, we have a couple of awards I want to give out. So we have an Outstanding Leadership Award, which kind of goes to the fact of, for this student, they probably deserve to be in the top jazz band, and we needed help in the section, and they're going to be a senior, and they were super cool about making the change and offered to be a section leader and take solos and take some leadership, and we're really proud of him. So I'd like to give the Leadership Award to Ben Bergman. The next one, we have an Outstanding Soloist Award, and I would like to give this one to a trumpet student who has a really great attitude, was one of the first people to volunteer for a solo, and you heard him play a solo earlier. His name is Grady Hawks. Many deserving students, a lot of talented students at the camp, and I really appreciate the opportunity to work with them all. The last one we're going to play for you is a Duke Ellington standard called Caravan. This will feature another awesome trumpet player, Eleanor Reedy, and then will also feature Ben Bergman on the alto saxophone. Thank you much. Again, this is the Gold Jazz Band, and this is Caravan.
And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jazz Band Black and their director from Derby High School, longtime High Plains Music Camp faculty member, and an amazing jazz musician himself. Please welcome to the stage, Adam DeVault.
Test. Hey, how's everybody doing? That first tune was a Thad Jones tune arranged by Mike Carubia, entitled Big Dipper. It featured Keats Johnson on trumpet, Catherine Vieira on alto, Owen Goodrich on tenor, and Cedric Getz on alto. Give him a hand. The next tune we're going to do for you is a Duke Ellington Billy Strayhorn tune entitled Such Sweet Thunder, and it's going to feature Deacon Hurley on trumpet and Kenley DeLay on trombone. This is Such Sweet Thunder. Our third selection for you this evening is going to be a tune that I think Miles made famous. This is a Rick Stitzel arrangement of On Green Dolphin Street. In the arrangement, there's not really any solos, but I wanted to give as many students opportunities as possible. So this is going to feature two students, Beckham Carr on piano and Cedric Getz on alto saxophone. This is Green Dolphin Street. All right. So I got a few things to say. First of all, I want to say thanks to Dr. Lil Pop and Fort Hays State University. I graduated in 1997 from Fort Hays, and I was talking to Brad, and I thought, because this was my reality, that this hall was just like, it was here. But it was the fall that I came to school here was the first year they used this. And so I've been playing in this hall for, 30 years. And it's a wonderful place to play. And every time I get to come back to Hays, it's like coming home. And it really means a lot to me to come back in the summers and work at this camp. And to kind of echo something else that Alex said, Brad Dawson was an important figure in my life, and he really changed my life. And so the opportunity to come and get to work with him again is always welcomed, and I appreciate all the opportunities he's given me over the last 30 years playing my instrument and getting to teach kids. He's really important to me, and Fort Hays is really important to me. So it's awesome to be here. I always try and make it to Taco Shop while I'm here. That's one of the things that's still around since I was in school, if you can imagine that. So anyway, but I love being here, and I enjoy coming back every summer. I want to thank all of the staff and faculty that helped out with this band. It wasn't just me. You saw a couple people playing in the group that obviously aren't high school kids, and those folks have been helping out all week. And then we've also had quite a few interns and stuff and counselors coming in and helping out, and that's been just tremendous. So a big hand for those folks for helping us out. I don't really get the opportunity. I wanted to have you thank both of our drummers, Sullivan Luttrell and Parker Anderson Kepler. Is that right? Did I say that right? Kepley. It changed on me. Stupid notes. Okay, Kepley. These guys have worked really hard, and they've had tiny little things in each tune, and man, they've been really important. So if you give them a big hand, that'd be awesome. And then I need to give a couple awards. Give me just a second. So these awards are for outstanding leadership and performance in the group. There's tons of great kids in this group, as you can tell. They really worked hard, and they had a lot of fun this week, I hope. And so it was hard to pick, but I chose two students, and those students are Claire O'Malley and Cedric Getz. They were really important. Give them a hand. All right, we got one more for you. We're going to do a Buddy Rich thing. He didn't write it, but it was from his big band, a library. Paul Jennings arranged it. It's entitled Mercy, Mercy, Mercy. It is going to feature a lot of people because, like I said, I think it's really important to let kids get the opportunity to improvise, and so we loaded this one up. So you're going to hear from Dakota Brinkley on bass, Callie Long on alto, Kenley DeLay on trombone, Keats Johnson on trumpet, Renner Hawks on alto, Olivia Canast. Did I say that right? No, dang it. What is it? Kennist. See? They don't teach that in school, just so you know how to say people's names. Okay, Olivia Kennist on bari, Brandon Stawinski on tenor, and Aiden Brinkley on guitar. This is Mercy, Mercy, Mercy. Thanks so much.
All right, welcome to what is going to really be a special performance of the High Plains Music Camp Faculty Jazz Band. Brad Dawson recently retired from the University of Fort Hays State University after 53 years? 42 years, sorry. Seems like 53. I was close. Just a legendary figure in Kansas jazz and at Fort Hays, as you've heard from our two directors, that what a special importance he played in their lives and countless others throughout the state. Without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend. Please welcome Brad Dawson.
Thank you. That was a standard that was arranged by Rick Stitzel, and that featured Adam Ward on trombone and Nash Olin on piano. This next one we'd like to do will feature our lead tenor, Sir Adam DeVault, and this is written by John Fedshock. This is called Bossa Rio. Thank you. This next composition will feature lots of people in the band. John Eust on trumpet, Nash Oland on piano, Adam DeVault again on saxophone, Anzia Howard on trombone, Dawson McNeil on trumpet, and Gerald Spates on bass. This is Fred Stride's composition, Blues in the Basement. Next, we'd like to do a composition by Antonio Carlos Jobim, who wrote a lot of Brazilian bosses. I mean, a lot of them, and really great ones, too. And this is one of his compositions, No More Blues. So big bands like this one have been around for a very long time. Back in 1930s, we started to see a lot of big bands and a style emerge called swing. And these bands were mostly dance bands, and they were very famous. In fact, those bands, like Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, people like that, those were household names, like any of the pop vocalists that you can think of today, like Taylor Swift. Those people were just as famous. They were on live radio broadcasts and things like that. And so this is all predates rock and all of its iterations that it went through. And it was a popular music at the time. And people danced to it. There was a big dancing craze, and large ballrooms were built. And people would go dancing. And so I want you to try to imagine a time where, first of all, people left their house, and secondly of all, that there was no cell phones. Telephone was barely in existence. Television was not there yet. And radio was in existence. In 1926, RCA developed the first nationwide radio broadcast from coast to coast. That changed everything with popular music. That began to develop superstars in music because of that national broadcast. And so this was a time where people really socialized, where they went out, where they talked to each other face to face. There was no texting, there was no email, there was nothing like that. And it was just a different time in our history. And whether it was a better time or worse time, I don't know, that's up to you to decide, but it certainly was different. This next piece that we'd like to do is from that era. This is a tune called I'd Never Been in Love Before. And it's a beautiful ballad, and one that I played many times with a really dear friend of mine, Ken Folsom. And so I want to dedicate this to Ken, who I know is out there somewhere in the universe. And so tonight, this is for Ken. Imagine yourself in this large ballroom, and during the 1920s, 1930s, and you're out there dancing, and this band is playing this tune. This next piece we'd like to do is written by Mike Tomorrow, and it's kind of an interesting piece, the way it begins, the way it ends. So listen to that, see how things are layered, and you're going to see it begin one way with the layers, and it ends the opposite way with the layers and the different instruments. This will feature Alex Tepper, our lead alto, on alto sax, and this is Mike Tomorrow's Rivers. Thank you. We'd like to close this evening with a chart written by Bob Mincer. This will feature actually some group improvisations, some kind of strange things that are going to go on here. We're not sure exactly what's going to happen, but it will happen. And this will also feature Victoria Griffith on drums. This is Bob Mincer's Good News. Thank you all very much.